We've only got about just under an hour of Jimmy's time, so
as long as you like.
Well, can I first of all thank the three members of the association for coming along today. We've got, of course, you all know Hugh, I'm sure, and Kenneth, and I think this is Jimmy's first visit to the meeting ours.
Well, it is actually.
But thank you all for coming along. Now, Jimmy was a lieutenant in the Royal Corps of Signals when he was captured in Norway on the 1st of May 1940. He was one of the very first British Colditz POWs captured. In fact, only one or two army officers were captured earlier than him who were in Colditz. He was also one of the most northerly captured in Europe. He was a prisoner for 5 years, and also alphabetically, Jimmy's surname puts him as the last named officer, prisoner of war, of the British Army in Germany in World War II.
He's the last man on my list.
They are on everybody.
Other than a 3 month spell in Spangenberg, he spent from early August 1941 until 16th of April 45 in Colditz. Around 10 officers were sent to Spangenberg as they were considered relatively harmless, but they were all pretty soon back in Colditz, so certainly some of them, including Jimmy, qualified twice for Colditz. His prisoner of war number was 11850. His personal number was 69079.
Well done.
And he was in the first 50 into Colditz and arrived with the likes of John Watton, Lulu Lawton and Bobby Colt. He was heavily involved in the musical life in Colditz and was also a key member of the illicit radio team. And about that in particular, I know he's going to speak for about perhaps 15-20 minutes, or however long he wants, and then obviously some questions from the floor. So, ladies and gentlemen, Jimmy Yule.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me here to be your guest speaker today. And I'd like to start, I would say, that if any of you are familiar with the French language, you would say as a result of what David had just said, you would say, quel build-up. that is what they would say, funnily enough. There's an awful lot, a tremendous amount of pidgin English going on in the French language. It is unreal. You see, that's not the point. But I've been asked to talk about the radio room and everything associated with that. And so let's concentrate a little bit on that, shall we? Because you don't want to go through my life history before I got there. Because David has summarized that very, very well. And so, it was after I'd had this sojourn in Spangenberg that really, to my surprise, and I think to my horror, I would say, and you mustn't understand me when I say this, that I found that all the international element of Colditz had disappeared entirely. We were a complete British camp from the middle of 43 onwards, August 43 onwards. No, it was June 43, I think, now I come to think of it. And I was disappointed because, as you well know, when you have an international camp, life is somewhat different than if you have just a load of Brits. As a result of the fact that there were so many international of officers, French, Dutch, Polish, Belgian, that we were able to take advantage, and I certainly did, of being able to learn about them and learn their language, and in actual point of fact, it profited me very much after the war. I won't go into that, because that's a different story. But I made use of the fact that I could speak French in two ways, first as a soldier, and then when I became a civilian, working for a company which you may find strange, is an English company called De La Rue. And the French company who was associated with them went by the name of Bull, which is really rather odd. But anyway, that is once again slightly beside the point. But the thing is this: when I came back, I suppose about within 24 hours, I learned from Dick Hyde. Dick Hyde took me to one side and said, "Would you like to help me get the news with our radio?" And of course I said, "Yes, of course I would." And so from there onwards, he and I, right at the beginning, we shared the, what shall I say, duty, chore, pleasure of every evening at about 6:30, between 6:30 and 7:15, listening to the news on the long wave world service produced by the BBC. And you know, I dare say, what the signature tune was that was. And so we had all the V for Victory coming up, and this is the BBC London, and this is Alvar Liddell, and I dare say you remember him. And we used to get this night after night, and it was a tremendous thrill, I don't mind telling you, sitting up in this little eyrie, listening to the news and taking it all down. Well, Dick quite rightly said, well, it is very difficult for us both to keep the thing on tune and to get down the news at the same time. And so what I suggest, we have two writers, and so we recruited Jim Rogers and Mickey Byrne, and we formed ourselves into teams, as I think most probably you are aware, and Dick Howe, Jim Rogers formed one team, and Mickey Byrne and I formed the other. And so, night after night, alternate nights, we went and did our stuff. Of course, we had moments of interest, of course we did, because the German knew perfectly well that there was a radio somewhere, but they hadn't the least idea where it was. Try as they might, they couldn't find it. Now, I don't know how many, out of curiosity, how many of you are familiar of the actual location of this radio? Do you all know where it was? I expect you do, don't you? Because I was going to say that you know more about Codex than I do. But anyway, the thing is that located where we were, it was extremely difficult, I would think, for the Germans to guess the actual location. But it was very, very successfully hidden by our good friends, the French, before they left. Guigues, who I'm sure a lot of you know who he was, the leader of the French opposition, as you might say, and he and his friends installed this radio so successfully that it lasted until, well, 3 or 4 years ago, when by chance a workman who had been sent up into the attics in order to repair the roof started saying, well, I've got to get this cladding down here, this wall, and Hugh Bruce would know where it was because he slept in the room in particular. He started tearing the wall down, and eventually he hit this cabin. And it so happened, it was really rather curious, that when it was discovered, there were 3 Brits happening to be visiting Coleridge at the time. I don't know whether you know this. But there were 3 characters who were recording some classical music in Leipzig. And they had a light moment for a little while. They didn't know what to do for about, I don't know, 2 hours or something like that, or maybe a little bit more. And so one of the characters who'd been there before said, come on, let's go down to Cody's and have a look at it. And so they did. And at the very moment they set foot into the courtyard, there was this workman coming along with a document in his hand. And it so happened to be a notebook, which I didn't know anything about, and which I'd forgotten completely, but it was a notebook in which I'd written down a lot of stuff. And they were absolutely amazed, you see, and Kenneth Lockwood will know all this history from now onwards, because then the word got about. The radio room discovered and all that. And I dare say you may recall, for good or for worse, better or for worse, that on one day, in around about February, I think it was, some few years ago, yours truly found himself on the front page of the Daily Telegraph. It was embarrassed, really. And, oh yes, it's quite extraordinary. I just say, I think he's got a picture there. Pass it round. No. But anyway, that was the start of a quite interesting little saga. Well, it is perfectly true. You see, this fellow had wrecked the joint. He had wrecked the wall against which we leant, and he was demolished, the actual cabin itself, the entrance and all that sort of business. But anyway, right now, the Germans themselves have realized that there's a certain amount of, what shall I say, tourist attraction to Coeditz Castle and to what went on, and they have built up and they have installed, some of you may have seen it, I don't know, the mock-up of this radio cabin, and they've got it this in one of the cells, which you, on the left of the courtyard as you go into it. Like you duck round up some stairs and up into the battery of cells. And they must say they made a very good job of it, really. It so happened that earlier this year, at the end of June, I had a niece who was married to a nephew of mine, German girl, who was married to a nephew of mine, who sadly, some years ago, found herself a widow. Her husband died very, very suddenly while he was working for Balfour Beatty on some projects in Berlin. But that's a different story. But I heard that from her that she was planning to come to this country. And so I said to her, well, look, Carita, if you're going to come over, leaving Berlin, there's one thing which you better do. You better show me around Berlin before you leave. And so we arranged that is exactly what I should do. I should go to Berlin, she met me there, and if you're interested, on the Saturday morning, we'll go down to Coeditz. Because Berlin and Coeditz is not all that far apart, a couple of hours, if you're lucky on the motorway. But of course, we weren't particularly lucky. They have traffic jams over there like we do. And we hadn't been going 3/4 of an hour down the motorway to Leipzig when they had one of their famous, as the German word is, a Stau. It's a lovely word. And it's a beautiful word, very expressive, I think. And well, anyway, it didn't really matter because we got to Coeditz, we had a look around, she was interested, I was interested, the curator of the museum was interested, and so were 1 or 2 other visitors, and it was really worthwhile. The only trouble was that we couldn't get up by the nature of things up into the attics, and that was a pity. But it was a little bit difficult at the time, because I wasn't on my own, you see, and although I had Creta, that didn't matter either. But we did have 1 or 2 other visitors who wouldn't have been, we couldn't tow them along, it just wasn't possible. And so I didn't insist on that. However, be that as it may, there was nothing really to see, apart from what you had seen in the press and photographs here, there, and everywhere. There was nothing to see, to be quite honest. And what was available in the courtyard and in the cell was very, very realistic. And, well, I don't know, somebody took a few photographs, I don't know what happened to them quite. But anyway, so that was quite the bringing you up to date with the history of this wonderful radio cabin and so on. And I think at this stage, Mr. Chairman, I think most probably it's a question of enough to give you all the background of my association, if you like, with that splendid little construction, except to tell you one little bit of incident, which was really quite curious, because one evening I went up there and I tuned in and I said, oh, have I really got the right programme? Because all I could hear was this. And then there was a pause. And then the chap said, 30-15. Listen to it, honestly, it's quite incredible to listen to someone broadcasting or commenting on a tennis tournament or tennis match. It was most unreal, I can assure you. But anyway, there we are. One had amusements, I can assure you. Anyway, I think most probably, Mr. Chairman, I don't know whether there's enough getting on with, is it?
Well, I'm sure this is
I mean, because it's a question of, I think, Q&A now. If anybody's got questions, don't hold back. There may well be a lot of questions to ask, and I'll try and answer.
With regard to choice of personnel who were operating the radio, was part of the factor physical size?
I would say no, because Dick was a big man, Jim Rogers was much taller than me, and
Dick was a big man after.
well, he wasn't as lean as me. No, but I mean, it is quite, there wasn't a criteria. What the criteria really was, people who were interested in news. I mean, Jim Rogers, he was our news character. He, every night, every day, as far as I can remember, he used to read the German newspapers, and then every evening at, say, 6 o'clock, I don't know what time it was, gave us all a digest of what the Germans were up to and what the state of the play was with the war and the like. And especially when it was a question of the Germans invading Russia and then being beaten back, unfortunately, as one folks might say. But you know what I mean, they got beaten back, and then he used to expound all this.
Did they have to be able to write shorthand to take it down?
And not essential, but Mickey Byrne, you see, the other one,
Yeah.
he was a shorthand writer, because before he became a commando, he was the Times correspondent, as I expect you remember, some of you are aware. And he was on the team which accompanied the royal family out to Canada, America and Canada in 1938. And he had one or two amusing experiences about that too, where there was an American, you see, because they decried the royal family, always trying to make a laugh out of them and so forth. And they went all from east to west, ended up in the west coast, and they get up to Vancouver. And there was one girl called Dixie Ty, I think her name was, who wrote, you know, the visit has become so stereotyped and so staid that instead of calling it the Union Jack, they call it the Union John. Well, it didn't last very long because there was a reception over in Vancouver for all the press. Well, you know as well as I do, the Americans can't hold their liquor. And before you know where you are, they were crowding the royal family, the royal couple. And it wasn't the Brits who were keeping them away, it was other Americans. They come on, just this way. So the royal family won over. It was interesting. But anyway, those, I suppose, were the criteria really. You had interest in the news, and as far as Vicky Byrne did both things, you see. He knew what the news was all about, and he could do shorthand. The only time that I remember that he was defeated when we got the news, and he was a chap who, in many ways, dear to my heart, was a wonderful Negro pianist called Fats Waller. And Fats Waller died, and Mickey Byrne was lost. He didn't know what it was about. He talked about Fats Waller. Oh yes, I had to put him right. My dear chap, it's Fats Waller. Oh yes, very much so. The chap, funnily enough, that Dick Howard met in one of his Fats Waller's visits to England. Yes, he did. Dick Howard's a funny chap. What he did before the war is nobody's business. And so did Don Donaldson, who was one of the people who used to put us in. And he was so huge, you see, Fats Waller, that when he was sitting on a pedestal, he said it looked as if he was sitting on a spike. And the other thing is, Dick, I said, well, you know, Fats Waller, how do you do those tents, you know, this thing? And Fats Waller said, give me your hand, boy. And he had a huge, great hand, and he got, it was amazing. But anyway, it's all rather beside the point.
Jerry, can I ask, there are some pictures over there, if I can't really get this over to you, but the access to the radio hide has always said that you got in from the top.
Right.
Now, all the photographs that I've seen, and indeed there are some over there in the book that I brought along today, that the radio hide appears to be in an angle such as that. Now, what I've never understood is how did you get into the top?
You didn't. No, we didn't get in there. No, this is the difficult part to establish, you see, because you can imagine the roof trusses like this.
Yes.
All right, and each one has got a similar thing to where the actual radio cabin was. So what you did, you slipped down into the adjacent cavity, if you like.
And then went inside.
And then went inside there.
Okay, I've got you. Yeah.
All right. And you just get on your tummy on bong like that. Through a couple of little wooden switches, and you opened the door. You just slid in bingo, and you were in about 15 to 20 seconds.
How long were your stints inside there?
Well, nominally about 15 to 20 minutes, you see, the duration of the news. But, I mean, it could be any other time. And sometimes, you're up there for an hour or more, you know, waiting for all sorts of things to happen. Because sometimes the Germans used to say, all right, they used to have searches round about there. And of course there were two of us up there. Well, fortunately we had a couple of two ghosts, and so it didn't really matter very much. They came in very, very handy. But there were other occasions where, especially in the winter time, well, air raids. And of course when that happened, the power went off. All the power went off everywhere. And the power to the radio went off. So you were just sitting there twiddling your thumb. You didn't know quite well how long you were going to be. But that didn't really matter very much. And especially when there's a wonderful discovery was made, not where we were, but there was a tunnel. And suddenly somebody found that when they went down there, they touched something, and the ordinary light bulb started to glow. Where was the juice coming from? And it was coming from the mains, but it was half strength. It was 110 volts. And they suddenly realized, you see what had happened, that, I've got to get this right, that under normal circumstances, in any electrical system, there was 220 volts between the live wire and neutral. There's always that. All right? And then, in that particular funny wiring that we had, they discovered that there was 110 volts between a live wire and earth. And so this was absolutely wonderful, because this radio was equipped to accept either 220 volts or 110. So when the lights went out, we arranged a series of switches to make it possible to transfer from 220 volts to 110 without burning the setup. You throw up everything off, they switch on another lot, and switch the control from 220 to 110, and in a matter of about 15 or 20 seconds, you're back in business again, in the dark. Well, we didn't, because we had a bit of a glow. So, I mean, it was dead easy, you see, and so for, I was up there for hours, you know, sometimes, waiting for someone to let me out, to be quite truthful, and it was during those times that I used to try, if I was on my own anyway, and I used to be on my own from time to time, for one reason or another, try my hand to try and take down high-speed walks. It wasn't very, very successful, but partly it was interesting. You got quite a lot of gist from this. And as a result, you got an awful lot of nonsense, as I think, in a book which Michael's got. Oh, I don't know where it is now.
So how was the radio built?
Well, no, this is a good question, because this particular one was an ordinary commercial radio that had been brought in.
How?
But Geek had, at the same time, he had a number of different radios. I don't mind telling you, it had been shipped in as backup, if you know what I mean. He had acquired all the pieces. Don't ask me how, because I have no idea at all. But anyway, that was up to him. He had enough equipment
Please,
to
who is
keep
he?
it going. What?
He.
Yeah, Geek.
Who?
He was a Frenchman.
Ah.
Yeah, Frenchman Geek, who was the head of the Dick Howe's equivalent, if you like, on the French side. And when the French left, he took enough bits and pieces for a couple of radios, I think in his new camp. And he said, well, Dick, you better have this one here. And so he left it behind. Yeah.
What sort of warning system did you have for approach of Germans? Or did they come very
Well, we knew perfectly well if there was a signal, if there was a light, the light was switched off, then we knew there was something wrong. So we just switched everything off and just waited for the people to disappear. It's interesting actually to be in that area and hear the feet on the roof above. Oh, it's very interesting.
When you talked about that discovery of the 110-volt system, was it a bit of Pat Reed's imagination when he said about the self-generating by using the organ out of using the electric motor that originally powered the organ? He said that was converted into a generator.
I know nothing about that. It certainly wasn't used. It wasn't used for the radio anyway.
Right.
It wasn't used for the
Because he
radio.
said that
Anyway.
two cupboard doors had been made into a...
Well, it may well have been, but that
Not
is
radio.
not my territory,
Not
as you might say, so I really can't comment on that.
Right.
But I dare say my friends here might know something about it.
I agree with you entirely.
Pat Reed always felt it should make a good story.
We read it in the book, but we never knew anything about it until. Isn't that right, Kenny?
That's another myth.
The lot went on which a lot of people didn't know anything about. Well, why should they? This is the whole thing. You didn't know what was going on by any manner of means.
That's right.
No, you didn't know what your next door neighbour was doing.
Jimmy, was there any attempt ever to make a transmitter?
No, I can tell you that. No, that's the straight answer is no. There was no point, you see,
No.
because if you had started tapping out, they would have descended on you like a pack of rats. All right, as if you were a pack of then honestly, they would track you down straight away.
That'd be in big trouble.
There would have been deep
Big
trouble.
trouble.
There was no need for it because there was a system of communicating back home with which you're familiar, so there was no need to do anything else. And as far as the other way is concerned, well, I personally wasn't really familiar with any particular device or code, but you knew what was happening because before any news broadcast, there were always a series of special messages for people who were listening especially at that time. There might have been in Denmark, there might have been in France, there might have been anywhere. I mean, along the lines, Mother has put out the washing today, or whatever it might be. Something completely, 4 or 5 words, having a particular meaning to the people for whom it was destined. And we just took an interest in that, and well, it's interesting. Then we just put it was the news, and here is the news read by Alvar Tadell, and so on.
So on a normal evening with no problems from the Germans, how long would it take to get in and get out, roughly?
I suppose to get in would have been about 30 seconds at the outside.
So long.
Yeah, because you scampered, you see, you saunter. You know, you ran as quickly as you could, and the people who are up there, of course, put us in and put us out, they were in there for the longest time. But as far as we were concerned, it didn't take more than about 30 seconds to go from our access point, just at the top of the stairs, in that particular block, the Belgian quarters and all that, up the top, the access was there, to run along that little stretch, and then at right angles, then drop down, having been preceded by either Keith Milmont or Don Snock, whoever was beyond duty at the time, and just slipped in like that and closed up, and then you took your time, you see, with the actual business. And then once again, a little knock on the door or something like that, and we knew there was a fellow was there, and once again you were out pretty smartly.
Did you volunteer or were you pushed to be the radio operator?
Oh, I wasn't pushed at all. No. Dick Howard said, would you like to do it? And I said, yes. Of course I would, you see, no question about it. And it was tremendous fun.
I bet it was, yeah.
It was a privilege, a great privilege.
And is it sort of completely true that, what I believe is that the wall of this radio hide, when the French had it, actually backed onto the English sleeping quarters.
No, it's not.
And yet the English had no idea that the French were using that.
It was at that time, I think it was the Belgians.
The Belgians, yes.
The Belgian
Belgium,
quarters.
When
It was
the
Belgian
French-
quarters. And then ultimately became English quarters, and Hugh Bruce was in
And at that time, of course, the radio had become the English property.
That's right.
That's right.
That's
When the French left, early in that year,
excuse me.
of 1943, fairly early anyway, in the early months, the Belgians went about the same time, and the Belgians occupied those attic rooms which were adjacent to the radio room. And no sooner they'd gone, all vacated, we were told that we could occupy the whole of that block, the Keller House. And there was a mad rush. Everybody took their belongings and ran over there. And I and a couple of other disreputable people, disreputable characters, ran up the stairs right to the roof and bunged our bags on the beds of this tiny little room up there. And that was right up the top and was known as the Belgian quarters. And it was right alongside Jimmy's
That's right.
Jimmy's cabin.
And you really didn't know the radio was there?
We never, it's a very interesting thing actually, because when I went over there, it had been revealed in Colditz post-war, and I looked at the place where my bed was. In fact, there was a bit of graffiti on the wall above my bed with my name on it.
Don Donaldson kissed
something
Hugh
blood.
Bruce's backside.
Yeah.
He was here next birthday.
Yeah, kiss my ass stuff, Canadian.
The photograph is there.
Anyway, they've taken that bit out, they cut that out and put it in the museum. But that is on the other side of a tiny little room, and Peter Tunstall was on this side, and I located that, and I thought to myself, well, Peter's head must have been within inches of this radio cabin. And I also remember that we never, ever heard a peep from these people who actually went across the roof above our heads and slipped down beside this room in this space, in this void space. And we never heard them making a noise or anything else. Of course, they were very well lagged, weren't
Oh,
they?
yes, we were. Yeah, the blankets all over.
Very well lagged.
Oh, yes, there were blankets inside. And, well, one or two, I don't know. But anyway, we were all sort of blanket protected, if you like to put it that way. But I will recall that I think it was about the second or third day that I'd been up there, and it was the beginning of the occupancy of the Belgian quarters by Pete Tunstall and Hugh, that I couldn't get on with the job because I was banging the wall over bleeding. They were hammering something, I don't know what it was. Gosh, that was yes, sir.
When you noticed the discrepancy between the news you read in the German papers you got and what you heard on the BBC, did you ever let the Germans know?
They knew anyway, they knew that we knew.
So they were listening to the BBC as well?
I wouldn't like to say that. No, I don't think they did, because it wouldn't have been worth their while. Let me put it this way, that the rules were, as far as I can recall, amongst the German population, that anyone who is caught listening to a foreign broadcast will be shot.
Yes.
I mean, what about the soldiers?
Now, having said that, that applied strangely to the military as well. And so no one on the German side ever listened, to my knowledge, to any British broadcast. Because it doesn't take long for people to realise that there's a discrepancy. You see, who's telling the truth? And it's interesting, you see, and you can understand that. But I will say this, that interpretation, all right, for example, the the German papers used to publish the successes, quite rightly, of the German forces. And if they were in Russia, for the sake of argument, they used to say our Panzer divisions are fighting very, very strongly and defeating the Russians east of Kiev. And then 2 days later, you would get the Panzer divisions are fighting very strongly and defeating the Russians west of Kiev. And this is how they did it. This is what it was. And I dare say, young lady there might recall that, I don't know, but it perhaps something. But this is actually how they got the news across. Everything was positive. Well, you would do the same, wouldn't you?
Oh, yes.
I mean to say, it's natural. But then you just read between the lines.
Yeah.
You see? Oh, yes.
Jimmy, you three gentlemen were in several camps through the war.
Mm-hmm.
How widespread were radios in prisoner of war camps, officer prisoner of war camps?
Can't answer that question.
Was the one in Spangenberg, for example? Or don't you know?
Not to my knowledge.
No.
No, not to my knowledge. Certainly not when I was there.
What about Malag Milag Nord?
I think eventually most Eichstätt certainly had a radio, I believe. I wasn't there myself. The Malag, I think, certainly had a radio towards the end. There was certainly very good communication with the UK, in that they did a lot of sort of undercover espionage, which I don't think really helped the war effort at all. But there was a two-way conversation. I would say that at the end of the war, practically everybody did have some sort of radio.
I wouldn't like to say.
At the beginning, I think probably not, and certainly Konitz was a leader in this way.
Yeah. How many radios did the authorities, the German authorities, capture in Konitz? They got one, certainly, didn't they?
Well, they got one from us, anyway, certainly. And they caught one at least from the French. I think they caught two. One which was installed, one which wasn't. And they found one belonging to us, which hadn't been installed either. So I suppose they found three, and I suppose they reckoned that, well, we found one, I don't know, okay. But the German authorities, they knew perfectly well when we had good news and when it was pretty rotten, because of our evening roll call. Because we always used to have Jim Rogers and Co. normally giving the news at whatever it was, say 7 o'clock or whatever, I don't know, 6:30, something like that. We all used to foregather up in the, it was quite a thing to say, well, here's the news and everything. And we used to have competitions, team by team, have the biggest scoop and the like. And I think my best scoop, it was when I happened to be on my own, and I told Keith Mills, who was my putter-inner, I said, we've got the biggest scoop of all, you know, what's that? Italy's out of the war. Oh yes, indeed. That was good, that was great.
Jimmy,
Yeah.
just a couple of questions.
Yes,
Now, I was interested to see if you used stooges for the radio room. Now, you've more or less answered that in as much as you said you had a couple who pushed you through it, etc.
Yeah, it was very, very heavily stooged.
It was.
Oh yes, that is to say, you had the stooges right up at oh yes, the whole time, because we had to be protected. And while we were going in, and while we were there, and we were going out. And Grizz Davis Clearfield, he was the chap who really organised all that. But there was always someone at the top of the stairs, and someone at the same time opening the doors and let us in. Then bingo and everything went. But then he stood there and people said, to keep an eye on things. Oh yes, indeed, we were very heavily stooged, and we were very well protected. There's no question about that.
One other thing then is that about the D-Day landings, did that come through, did you pick that up at Colditz?
Oh yeah.
And if so, did you give that information out before it became news? Do you remember? In actual point of fact, Germans knew about it, but the landing took place, and the Germans knew about that before we got it on the news. Right.
because the D-Day, you see, was early in the morning, and you can't keep a thing like that secret, not for any manner of means.
No, and you didn't do it till 6 o'clock at
And
night.
so we didn't know about it until
Yeah,
6 o'clock in the evening.
yeah,
We knew something was cooking because by the nature of things.
yeah.
And yeah, that's right.
And one last one, as you know, in 74, Dick Howe, Jack Group at Barry and Peter Allen went back to the radio room in Colditz, and they brought out a number of items, including a lot of escaping equipment, which they found there. Was that room also used for that purpose, for storage
No,
of
it wasn't.
escaping?
No, the vacant space which we're talking about was used for the odd rope, at least I let a bag of whatever it might have been, provision, no, not provision, but you know, I mean, escape material was lodged in the vacant space which we dropped. It's, you know, longer, there is about the length of this.
Yes,
I
so,
mean, but not very wide, Mark, because the roofs sloped like that.
so it was hidden beneath the floorboards into where you were...
Not beneath the floorboard, but it was just on the deck. I mean, it's most exciting because you've got to realise, you see, that in between the two floors, well, the ceiling and the floor, there was a gap of about a foot, which wasn't empty, it was full of rubble. And you could tread on it, I mean, it was solid. And so there was no question of having to tread warily when one got into it. You could drop down with it, and there was any fear of going through the deck by any manner of means, none whatsoever. So you could store what you liked, you know. And this is what happened. And it was, as I say, if the radio cabin was here, you dropped down here, and then you had a storage space from there onwards until you hit the wall.
Right.
Okay? Yeah. Yeah.
I remember reading towards the end of the war, somebody tuning into the east, to the Russians, and getting a series of Russian names, Russian voices calling out German names, then a machine gun burst, and then more names, and then more machine gun bursts.
We never got anything like that.
No?
Never got it. I don't think we had time to do that, you see. We weren't up there, you know, scanning and searching and doing this, and twiddling the knobs to see what we could find.
Did anyone reading it?
Except,
Yes, I've heard of that.
the only time when one had to tie was, I say, when it was dark. Or we were up there for a little time, and for one reason or another. You were a little bit idle when you said, well, what
Could I-
else have we got?
Could I tell a story about Frido Geek and how he got his radio out of the castle?
Yeah, you do that.
Frenchman, very, very clever Frenchman, who was he was their escape officer, but he was also a very clever locksmith and electrician and so on. He had all the skills. He discovered in the office, the parcel office, which was in the Keller house at the bottom, he discovered how to open the door, got the keys made. He also discovered that they were wired with an alarm, which was wired to the German guardhouse. So what he used to do was enter when the Germans in the evening, when the Germans had left the camp, he would enter the parcels office. First of all, of course, he'd switch off the alarm from a switch which he had in his own room above the canteen. He switched the alarm off. Then he would go down, go through the door, lock it behind him and go in and remove any parcel in there which was stored but not been actually opened and issued, but was due to be opened and issued the following day. By that means, he managed to get complete parcels with radios and contraband material without any effort of hiding it whatsoever, sent by his wife, whom he instructed in this way. Said, don't bother to hide it in anything, just put it into a parcel. Files, radio parts, etc. Just mark it carefully with my name and put this number. So he would go through and pick out this parcel, which had not been issued, and have a dummy parcel, which he would put in its place. He then took it out. Now, the following day, he was called upon by the German parcel staff to come in and get his parcel, and he would receive back his own parcel. That's right. Now, when they got warning that the French were going to leave, what he did was this. He took his radio, which was from a hide in Coles Castle somewhere. he put it into a parcel and wrapped it up and took it into the parcels office, which was also a part of it was being used for all those packages which had been searched and approved by the Germans. And he put it in, he put the Geprüft stamp on it and put it in the place where all these parcels had been searched and declared absolutely innocent. And the following day, when they formed up to go, all these parcels which had been searched and Geprüft, including his, containing a complete video, was issued back to him, and he took that off to live there. So it's very clever, really.
Nice chap, nice chap.
What did he do after the war? Locksmith?
He lived quite long. He came over here. Dick Howe's funeral he came over for, where I met him there again. He died a few years later than that, so he actually lived quite a long time. But I don't know what he did.
Several times actually at the Belgian reunion at Point of I've been over there several times. And he used to come to that, Point of Fact. And such a nice bloke, my goodness me. But he was a clever, he was an engineer, very basic. Oh yes. Yeah.
Jimmy, just one point I'm making aside, you mentioned that about the radio, and when I was fortunate to see it in the company of Blue and Lawton, there was the army blanket was still there. I was quite amazed that it was still there.
That's right. Yes,
just shortly, I think I saw it about a couple of weeks ago after your picture and after appeared in the telegram. I was there. I was amazed it was still intact.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's quite right. But you can understand the reason why the roof was leaking, because it was leaking when we were there. Because there were one or two moments of difficulty, if you like, when it had been snowing. And the snow used to blow and drift. And you could get underneath in between the tiles. And you used to lie anyhow in this vacant space in the upper story. Of course you had to be jolly careful when you trod your came like this. And try to do it quickly as well. Oh, that was interesting. Oh yes, certainly.
Are there any more questions? Yeah.
Go ahead. Plenty of them.
In view of the fact that the radio hide on the cabin was used very frequently, regularly, did you need to take special precautions to ensure that traces weren't left to show evidence?
That's a very, very good question, because in order to get into the space beside the actual radio room, the putter in had to lift a plank. Well, you know perfectly well that in old buildings, in between planks, there's always a lot of dust. And so, if you're going to lift a plank frequently, the dust disappears. It is pretty obvious that there's been some movement. And so, very often, dear old Keith Mill used to say, do you know, I can't find any dust. No, it was a serious matter. Oh yes, I know, it is ridiculous to laugh about dust, but it was terribly, terribly important. My goodness me. And they managed to find it somehow or other. I would say they went up there with pockets full of dust, because that's not quite, they haven't gone so far as that. But they almost got down to that sort of stage, because you had to have a supply of dust in order to make sure that it wasn't detectable. Good question. Absolutely right.
Amazing.
Yeah, that's right.
When I was, you had your means of communications back to England. Did you?
Oh, I see.
Through the
Yes.
letters.
Yeah.
Did you ever get any messages sent through the radio as a result of a letter sent?
Not to my knowledge.
No.
Not to my knowledge. We used to get, as I say, these odd bits and snippets before, and whether Mickey Byrne or Jim Morris say, look out for this or look out for that, I wouldn't know, to be quite truthful. It wasn't my business to know anyway, you see. And as far as I know, I don't think they were, because there was other means of using their communication through means of letters and the like. So that means wasn't essential, not on the slightest bit. No. But any more ideas? Well, yeah.
What was the feeling within the castle once it became?
I mean, what?
What was the feeling within the castle once it became public knowledge that D-Day landings had occurred?
Well, we knew we were going to win anyway, so it was absolutely first class. It was great. But we had to be a little bit careful. We didn't want to whoop it up, as you might say, too much, because that might have been a little bit difficult. But I well recall, and Kenneth will remember, that there were occasions when we used to have these daylight raids over Berlin and Leipzig and you name it, and sadly Dresden at one stage. And every so often there used to be these wonderful fortresses and liberators fly over the camp. And the very first time they did this, I think it was Easter Sunday in '44, if my memory serves me, we went mad. We got hold of every single musical instrument we could find, and we opened all the windows and blared these things dishonourably out of the windows, and we really frightened the local community. Oh, we did, because they thought there was a riot. Well, of course, there might well have been, but in actual fact, shortly after that, we were asked by the German camp commandant and through his camp officers, look, could you restrain your officers? I know they're pleased to see their own aeroplanes above, but quite frankly, please don't frighten the population. Oh yeah.
Were the Germans very bothered about you having a radio and them not being able to find it?
I don't know, I can't answer that question, but it would be my guess that they would be. It is my guess that they would be. What the heck is it? I mean, I'll tell you, there was a quite interesting thing, you see, because they might have been put off the scent a little bit. Because as Eggers, the security bloke, it was a funny thing that both Dick and I did have other interests. In other words, I was interested in the music, and so I suppose he didn't like to. People didn't associate me with anything else. And Dick played the drums, and he was a very, very good drummer, and he was interested in theatricals as well, and he was a very good director. And he didn't realise his involvement in all this thing either. And Eggers didn't either. He was the last person that Eggers thought of, to be quite truthful. And so we did have, as you might say, a pretty good cover in the bind, because we didn't draw attention to ourselves by any manner of means. We just went about our business. And the fact that I was involved was known to very, very few people. In amongst the Brits. Very, very few people knew I was involved. Very few people knew that Mickey Byrne was directly involved or Jim Rogers directly involved. They only knew that they could receive the news, but they didn't know where to get it from. They didn't know they were directly involved.
So there's a corollary to that, and presumably it was on a need-to-know basis.
Exactly. Well, exactly. I mean,
kept your security.
well, exactly. Everybody lived in their own little cocoon, and you didn't take a blind bit of interest in what other people were doing. It wasn't your business to find out at all.
So you just didn't say what you were doing, Ken?
No, you didn't. No, you didn't. No, you didn't. You just didn't do that because it served no useful purpose.
When you got the news, did you then pass it to somebody who printed it, passed it round?
Well, no, it wasn't quite like that. What happened was that, for example, Mickey Byrne, he had the news on a bit of paper.
Yes.
All right. He went down and said, well, here, Jim, here's the news. All right. And then having done that, he edited or something, or burned the piece of paper.
Oh, verbal.
You see.
Yeah.
And then Jim would just spout it out. And that was that, the day's news finished.
It went from mess to mess then.
Well, no, Jim, as I said, like you, everybody was gathered together, and he used to say it once. No, it was never written down on a bit of paper, that had been hopeless. You see, because, I don't know, somebody might have forgotten it and they leave it around or whatever. And so it was never written down. Or if Jim wrote it down, he very quickly, immediately burnt it himself. Burned before reading.
Did you share the information with some of the other nationalities?
We didn't have any other nationals when we had it, you see. When we were in control of the radio, there weren't other nationals at all. We had other nationals in amongst the British elements, of course we did, if you know what I mean, because there were so many people, you name it, French, Poles, Dutch, Czechs, who were in the French Air Force in particular, in the British Air Force in particular.
When the French had the radio before you, did they share the
No.
information they got from
Not a
you.
bit. Not a bit.
They've changed, haven't they?
Not a bit. Well, would you? I mean, so you wouldn't do that. No, it's not a starter. No, that's not a starter. And I don't suppose, you see, that the French had their radios all that length of time, to be quite truthful.
What were they listening to anyway?
No idea. I think that, well, I had no idea what they were listening to. I dare say there were some French broadcasts as well, from England somehow or other. Because the World Service, or the OC broadcast, they used to have, just prior to the British broadcast, they used to have a broadcast, a news bulletin for the benefit of the Belgians. There was a Belgian broadcast. And every now and then I used to get a tail end of that, and it was quite amusing. And it was quite interesting. And the fellows there used to, it's quite interesting, using his stepson. I thought, oh my goodness me. Yeah, all this, all right. That's right.
I'm conscious of the time.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Go on.
Any more questions?
Don't worry about it. Plenty of time as far as I'm concerned.
But you referred to there being more than one radio in the
I mean,
castle.
pardon?
You referred to there being more than one radio in the castle at different times. Was there ever any attempt to construct another hive?
Not to my knowledge. Not to my knowledge. There was only this one. I know we had a second one until it got, but there was no real need for it, you see, because we had one up our sleeve and said, all right, well, this one goes. But no, we didn't have another secondary one. Not to my knowledge, anyway.
Was there another one that was behind the French, in French quarters, beyond
Well, there was one when they were there. There was one in the French quarters, well, it was in the, yes, in the French quarters behind the map, you see, at one stage, the first one which was actually, it was given away, there was two pigeon there, gave that one away.
When Congress was liberated, did the Germans then immediately find your radio, or did you hide it?
No, it was locked up. In point of fact, I closed it all up. I was the last person to use the place.
Aha.
And
When was it discovered then?
it was only discovered in 3 years ago. 93.
Jimmy, there's a copy of the postcard there.
Well, 85 when they went back.
In there. There's a copy of the postcard.
When
saying
Dick Howe went
Railway
back in
Radio.
about 85.
This is when Pat
75.
Four of them, the four went back.
74.
We're talking of cross purposes. We're
Yeah.
talking about cross purposes. Because in the late 60s, the Frenchman Guy went back with a team, and he went up into the attics, and he rescued his radio. All right? In 85, or whatever it was, no, before that, 74, when Pat
Dick
Reed
Howe.
and Co. went,
Dick Howe and Pat Reed.
they went up there, and they sent a chap, but they were all too big, they couldn't get through the hole. And so a character, a member of the team, I don't know who it was quite, leant forward and grabbed what he was in his reach, but he couldn't get through either. You see?
They were too fat.
And he was all too fat. And he couldn't find anything, except a notebook, which one of mine was Michael Booker's got hold of. And which appeared, and I was astonished when we had the days of the coded story and all that business, television series. We had this reunion at the Imperial War Museum, I think it was, and to my astonishment, there was my handwriting clearly. Where did that come? And but anyway, be that as it may, that had been rescued. And then in 85, we went back, didn't we? All right, we went back in 85. I went up into that area with David Ray and Lulu Lawton, Don Donaldson. We managed to persuade the chap in charge to open everything up. But none of us could get through. It's a cold, Mark, you and I was about to strip off. He said, no, you can't do that. But anyway, to give a demonstration of how I went in. But I was dissuaded from doing that in case I got stuck, which is very thoughtful of me. But anyway, people who knew where it was didn't have to discover it, if you know what I mean. And then it was in '93 when the workmen discovered it. So they actually physically discovered it. It was only by an accident of
They knew it was up there.
chance it would be still there now.
The Germans virtually knew it was up there, but they didn't know exactly where it was.
No, they didn't. Had no
They
idea.
didn't take any notice of these various visits which came in.
They didn't know.
They just
no
sent a
idea.
sort of a low-class German up there who didn't report it anyway.
I'm particularly interested in a picture I have here of Dick Howe with the radio, this particular radio there. And I'm particularly interested because it looks almost like the sort of post-war Bakelite radios that one sees now. I'm just particularly intrigued. I would have thought that
It was an ordinary commercial radio. It was a commercial radio set.
That big light cover is around in England now, made in Munich.
Yes, yes.
It's
But
in
it
Britain.
means that they could get something
in
very
Britain.
nice.
Yes, yes, that's right.
Actually, Julie, just that there is the postcard there, unfortunately not dated, but it's actually addressed to Bill Morton. And it says, we came back to the old place as guests of the BBC. We found the radio cabin with a whole heap of stuff, just as we left it. Wished you were here. And it's signed by Dick, Jack Best, Rupert Barry and Pat Reed. Unfortunately, it's not a date on it.
When does they want to be? No, I mean, joking. But no, as I say, that no one actually went down there. They knew where it was. They discovered it. Instead to say that they realised it was all there. That no one actually went inside it. No. Well, there we are.
Right. Good. Well, that was absolutely fascinating. Thanks, Jimmy. Next. Jim is also one raffle. We'd like to receive a copy of Not All Glory from the Society. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very kind of you. Well, it's been a pleasure, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your kind attention and your reaction. And if any of you want to grip me afterwards, please do so.
Right. I think, if you don't mind, we'll carry straight on. As you're nicely settled. Can I first of all mention the newsletter? It's a bumper edition. It's the third this year. We've got another one coming out hopefully before Christmas. Back to normal size, I think. We were toying with the idea of printing this one in Dutch, but we decided against it in the end. But thank you to all those who contributed to it, and I think we've got enough now for a fourth.
Yes, as far as the newsletter is concerned, I want you to keep on sending in the material, obviously, because if there's an incident that takes place during the period in between the newsletters, then your article may be relevant to that, and obviously it will take priority to be put in. I do have a number of articles waiting to be printed, and I'd like to say that this particular one took a great big chunk out of our funds. It is a big one. We won't get one as big as this again, believe me. But it was a big one, and as such, we have got a number of our articles out of the way, but there are still some that are in the pipeline ready to be used. But I still want to keep more coming and coming. It was very slow starting in the early days, but now we've got it going. Can I just say, David mentioned something to me about old newsletters. Now, the very first few that we use, and what number are we up to now? We're up to number 12. 1 to 5, I think, are now collector's items. So if you've got any of those, they'd be worth putting into auction through Phillips. I should think about £50 to £100. But what I'm trying to do now is to keep up a balance of these newsletters, the printed ones, and we will be offering some for sale for anybody who wants additional ones for about £1 each or something like that. I think that's about everything as far as newsletters is concerned. I think David organised the printing of this, and I think you'll all agree with me that it's come out very well indeed. And also, one other thing that we have done, we are looking for funds for the society, for our society. It is our society. It's all voluntary. None of us get paid for this, etc., etc., etc. But we still want money. Now, the thing that we do have is to make money. That David over there, as you saw him on the video, has very kindly been videoing. He videoed the last presentation with Dominic Bruce. He's videoed this one with Jimmy Yule. Now these are going to be collector's items, believe me. And we obviously we are given the money to buying the videos, the cassettes ourselves, and then we're selling them back to you. Now they are for sale at £12 each, which is very, very reasonable. And we've got about 2 or 3 left at the present time. But we are, how many are there, David? 3. There's 3 left at the moment, and we aren't taking orders for any more that are required. We will have to do it by order, and I think we'll be doing it through Adrian. So if this current one, if you want a copy of today's presentation, then do it through Adrian. And there may be two videos. There's one of today's presentation. There's one that David took the trouble to interview Jimmy at his home, and also, who else was it you interviewed? John Davis, yeah, another Polish man. He interviewed him at home. Now those two come on one tape. So if you're interested in getting that tape as well, if you do it through Adrian, then we will organise that. And I think, and also there's, I'm doing David's job here. There's some cards over there which are for sale for 50p each, I think they are. So they're all funds for the society. And that's it. Now Adrian's going to talk to you about that money.
I'd just like to say, sorry for the subscriptions going up so much, but if I tell you our expenses since January up till today, not including this meeting, have been £732, and our income from 53 members paying their subs, if they all pay, is £795. You see there's quite a narrow margin between the two. Right, now the interesting thing is, Philip Hargaman, who came with us with his father, Jack Hargaman, last year, sent us to pay a sub, and there's a brief note which I'll read out to you. All is still going well over here. Father still speaks of all the experiences we had in Colditz with the society last time. The memories of that trip are seemingly as important to him as those of his original visit there some 50 years ago. If it were at all possible, I know he would want to go again, but at this time that seems unlikely. Pa and I both hope that all is going well with you and the society. He really enjoys getting the newsletter and hearing from members, especially from who seems to call him regularly at 6:45 AM Seattle time. Since Pa is usually awake at that time anyway, he really appreciates having someone to talk to. Please extend... I can't say that. Please extend our warmest regards to the rest of the society. As you can well imagine, we will not be attending the next meeting in October. Until we have the opportunity to meet again, Pa and I both wish all of you happiness and success. Sincerely yours, Philip Hargaman. I'll send her a letter saying.
Well, as Adrian's mentioned, we're over the 50 mark now, which is, I think, a good milestone. 10 relatives of association members, or deceased members of the group of Colditz, and about 12 from the overall? 13? Yes. Patrick, I'd say a few words.
You probably all received my brilliant typing for the trip to Colditz for next year. David and I went out for the Schlossfest, which was a 900-year celebration the town had. It was nothing to do with any military aspect at all. It was just to celebrate the castle and the town of the 900th anniversary. And they had everything from medieval jousting, arm wrestling, lots of beer, sausages, and the usual German palaver. David may mention, but what we did find out, which was interesting, is that now that the castle has been totally vacated by the sanatorium, so that there are areas that one can go into that you never would have seen before because they were out of bounds as far as visitors are concerned. The museum is now in the guardhouse as the entrance as you come up on the left-hand side, is looking much better. And they seem to have spent a reasonable amount of work, time and money in doing up certain areas. In fact, where the radio hide is, in fact, one could sleep there. It's pretty clean. You can go up there and see from a very good vantage point out into the courtyard, etc. We also, on our trip, went to Torgau on the way down, which is much more interesting than going down the motorway, in that, of course, it's where the Russians and the Americans met, and also was a fascinating camp, not for foreign prisoners, but of course for Germans who were either conscientious objectors or had committed certain misdemeanors. So our trip next year is going to include that. We felt there is something new for everybody. I know it's difficult for some people to get away at that time, etc., but if one wants to come, I'm going to have to put a cut-off date of probably, let's say, the middle of November, if any new members decide that they want to come. But I think, David, we were totally refreshed by what we saw. And hopefully by that time, the museum side and who's going to run it, and the curator will be sorted. And as I say, if you do want to come, please get in contact with me. My telephone number and my address is in the letter that I sent to you. Thank you.
Well, Patrick obviously has touched on the Schloss test which we went to. He and I represented the society. There were 6 Brits there, in fact, in all. 3 of us were society members. It was a very odd experience to see medieval jousting and an evening disco in the British War courtyard, and to see crossbow and air rifle shooting in the orchard below, where Mike Sinclair and Jack Bessidano escaped. What these chaps would have made it, I just don't know. Even more bizarre was to see the Wessex Morris men prancing around on what used to be the dowsing shed area. It was different to say the least, wasn't it?
Totally drunk.
Well, yes, they did sing. They were given a barrel an hour. One of the big bonuses down there was the Forge, which is a time warp. The lady of the house was a telephonist in the castle during the war, and that will be on our itinerary. That is well within the where Douglas Bader had his leg repaired and so on. The museum, as Patrick has said, is now well laid out in the guardhouse. The castle is now empty, and Patrick and I certainly managed to wander around almost at will, and we went to many parts we've never been to before, the promenade cells, the false buttress on the eastern side, up into certain parts of the attics which we've never been to before. The chapel's open still, the Major Anderson's drawings are still in the cellar, well laid out, and there's a new conference room as well being built on the north side of the castle, underneath the glider attic. Petty local politics continues to dog progress in the castle, at least it was at the time we were there. Things are happening pretty rapidly now, but certainly when we were there was a strong and difficult relationship between the mayor and Jens Malmen. It seems to me that the vast majority of people support Jens and what he's trying to do, and there's just a few, perhaps, people from the past, if you know what I mean, who support the mayor. But there certainly is a difficult relationship there. Jens actually was dismissed from his position by the mayor not long after we were there. Yeah. Now, events are taking place this weekend, virtually. The job of the manager, is that right, Michael?
Correct.
Of the castle.
Of the community. College community.
Is being decided on Monday.
Yeah.
And Jens has put himself forward for that position. We are in the process of sending a fax to him today, signed by the committee and the 3 representatives of the association here, supporting his nomination. I would imagine that when Hugh speaks, you can probably tell you a bit more about this. But certainly Dresden and the state itself appear to be are supporting Jens Malmen. The society hasn't taken any sides. Patrick and I were very careful to tread a middle line because we've been invited by both the mayor and Jens to this Schlossfest, and so we felt it was not only political but also polite not to take any sides or any comments which would be taken wrongly. Anthony Anderson has been working extremely hard over there and gets mentioned several times in the minutes of the Colditz Castle community notes on his internet. He's visited Dr. Andrea Dietrich, who's in charge of the state castles, and put forward his ideas and also supporting Jens. And I also wrote a letter, a personal letter, nothing to do with the society, also supporting Jens. He sends his apologies, by the way, Jens Malmen, for not being here, but obviously he's busy at the moment. A party British MP visited the castle on the 19th of September, along with the German and British road federations, to see about signposting the castle off the Autobahn and making it available from Leipzig and so on, because you have to get about 3 miles of the damn place before you can actually see a name hold it up. And that, I believe, is going underway soon. And there's some articles in the, was it the Financial Times, Ken? Financial Times and the Observer.
No, Times.
Sunday Times and Observer on that. And there's some articles, there's some copies over there which you can take if you wish. He will, in fact, Jens will be over here in Earl's Court on the 11th to the 14th of November this year at the World Travel Market 96, representing the area of Saxony, Colditz in particular, and he welcomes anybody who can get along with it. That's the 11th to the 14th of November.
The only problem that is a trade exhibition.
Yes.
And it's not open to the general public.
Thank you.
So you've got to have a connection with the travel business.
Thank you.
I made a comment about that in a moment.
Right.
I spoke to Jens about it.
Right. Well, I think you can update us probably more than I can update you. And the final thing is, I do want to mention this chap here, and the pronunciation here is unbelievable. Wolfgang help with it. It's Knockenmus. Knockenmus? Knockenmus?
Yeah, Knockenmus.
Right, you can't read my writing. Knockenmus. Knockenmus. And he wasn't allowed by the mayor to display his various things in the castle, so he's actually displayed at a village nearby.
Made no bones.
Right. He has got the most fabulous collection of photographs, cards, letters, work sheets from Colditz through the ages, but particularly from the war and just after the war. And I managed to get a couple of things over there, which you can probably see later on if you already see them, and some papers there which are fascinating from 1946 to do with the Red Army and work that was done on the castle in 46, 47. But he's got this fabulous collection of postcards in particular, some of which, you know, for a collector of that sort of thing. I mean, there's a photograph of Colditz Castle, and coming over the east, this huge sausage being put on it, you know, it's extraordinary, some stuff. So that's well worth a look at if we go there when we go there in April.
And what he's prepared to do as well is, because his exhibition only works in the summer from May to September, he would do a special one for us when we go and bring out the bits which are most fascinating about the time period we're interested in.
Yeah. Well, that's all the news I've got. I know that Hugh would like a word. Michael would like a word.
Yeah, very, very brief. Dr. Anderson and his daughter is most welcome here. Telephoned me this morning regarding this internet with Colditz. He says that Colditz is on the map of Germany. They're now on the major road maps. And also, if you go into internet, you can sign. I don't understand how you do this because I'm not that technically minded, but you can sign the visitor's book for Colditz, and he wants to get as many signatures on there as possible. So I mentioned that to you just in case you know how it's done. And the other thing, David Wendell, I really want to thank him for doing this videoing for us. I mean, he's taken his time. He's standing over there about this, you know, not relaxing in a chair. He's taken all his time to do that. So I think that's wonderful that it's doing it for us, the society, and also Terry Keaton there, who just kept trying to walk out. You wouldn't think about it. He was in the Navy and he was on the D-Day landings. I mean, but he's a very keen Colditz Society member, and he's been doing all this. Although he's now retired from Phillips, he took his time out to come here yesterday to get this organised. He's been staying at the door all the time. So that's the sort of dedication, what we're doing here and here. And that's what I want to say. Thank you very much.
The Chairman has allowed me to speak to you for about 10 minutes. I've got 3 points which I'd like to get over to you, mainly from the attitude or from the standpoint of the association, which I've no doubt will be of interest to you. Much of what has been said already, I had intended to repeat, but I put it the other way. What I'm about to say, much of it is already you have heard. However, I have a different angle to it. First of all, it's a great pleasure for me, and I know I can speak on behalf of the other 2 members of the association to be invited to you today. And it's a great pleasure, and we thank you very much for the invitation. I find it very rewarding, and I'm not at all surprised to hear that the numbers of the society are increasing strongly. In the last 2 years, I've been 4 times to Colditz with whole span tours, in company with a party of tourists. The visits to the castle have been usually one-day events, and the visitors on these tours have never ceased to amaze me by the enthusiasm and the interest which they have shown, and of course the knowledge which they have also shown me about the wartime Colditz, which is quite unbelievable. Now, Christopher Dowling, who is the curator of the Imperial War Museum, told me not long ago, when I suggested that Colditz would be forgotten when we were all gone, he said, not a bit of it. He said the stories are there for keeps, and the British interest at least will be just as strong in the future as it has been in the past, maybe more so. So that shook me a bit, actually, but nevertheless, we shan't be worrying too much about that. I'm speaking then from the point of view of the ex-Coditzers. However, this does introduce me to the subject of the present situation of the Colditz Association. Now, as far as the numbers are concerned, there are 64 British members still surviving. I'm not sure what their average age is, but on the other hand, I know that I was one of the youngest, so I can judge that the average age must be 79 or somewhat more than that. About a third of them are seemingly fit and active. Those people we see quite regularly. Of the remainder, some of the old soldiers have got afflictions of old age, and many are not able to travel or take part in any activities, and so on. However, it's not difficult for you to draw your own conclusion as to what the results of these might be. We may now have reached a point where very soon we'll have no one to organise our affairs, simple as they may be. We have prepared a simple organisation to be controlled by trustees of the younger generation to basically take over the remaining funds of what we have left and administer them according to our needs. However, there are other areas where shortly we will want to step down. And I'm suggesting that maybe 1 or 2 Colditz Society people may bridge the gap for us during the remaining years which we have left. The tasks are simple. 2 of them come to mind. Firstly, someone to represent the annual Colditz Secret Director Board, to represent the association, to represent us but not necessarily for the same person every time, but a person living in the region where the award is won annually. There is another case. We might have to ask someone to help to organise our lunch parties, which will be attended by fewer and fewer as time goes on. But we are determined to conduct these lunch parties until the last one have disappeared. We would welcome the discussions with your committee to see whether any of these would be practical and whether they be according to your own wishes. So much for that. It does seem to me that many of you would welcome the opportunity of meeting more of us and to spend an hour or two together, maybe at some simple function. At our own lunch parties, the primary object is to draw together the ex-Codicers for a kind of reunion where we can renew our own friendships. But you'll appreciate that we are careful not to overdo the guest list, as that would destroy the whole object of the function. I must therefore in general apologise to you and hope that you understand it is not possible, or it has not been possible, to invite many of you for the reasons I've given. This is a disadvantage to you, and I'm wondering if we can find a way of organising a function at which the members of the association and the members of the society could jointly and freely attend together. This is something which, again, we would like to discuss with your committee, and it is an idea which would need your approval. We could exclude the whole question of funds, because I am proposing that on this we might easily come to the conclusion that each member attending would pay for the cost of his on each side. If that were approved by you, I could do my best to promote it amongst the association members. The last subject concerns the Coalis Castle community, which you've heard quite a bit already. So I must apologise for talking to you about this when you've heard quite a bit about it already. However, it is important to understand our attitude. The Coalis Castle community was formed by James Malman, who was a former curator of the Museum of Coalis. And he has brought together in this organisation a wide selection of interested parties for the purpose of progressing and developing the castle. Naturally, he has our support. I mentioned that he was a former curator because owing to a row with the mayor, which you've heard about, he was removed from his post last month, very sadly. However, he gave me a ring last week, and he says to me that this may go contrary to perhaps what you've heard just recently, but he has said to me that all is now well, and that he has now been appointed as the overseer of the castle, representing the Dresden owners, and has jurisdiction over the whole castle and its development. Now, I see that we are sending a telex today, are we not? Supported by the society and supported by the association. We have just signed it. And it is going by fax, am I right in saying?
That will go by fax today as a result of a letter received today from him asking that his support, our support is given for a vote on Monday as to who will be the manager of the castle community.
So it seems to tie in. Perhaps he was a little, perhaps he has some foreknowledge, but it is a little bit difficult to follow their politics. And quite frankly, we have tried to avoid the political side of the argument. However, we are very pleased to to understand and to realise that there's a very strong emphasis on the museum and on the preservation of the records and the maintenance of the stories and the legends of the escape and adventures which took place in the wartime. These are things which we take very seriously, and we believe that they should be preserved for posterity. And in this case, we are certainly very much supportive of the Coates community for doing this. He has collected, this is James Marmon, has collected a wide-ranging number of representatives of town, from the town administration, including the Burgomeister's office, although obviously the Burgomeister himself doesn't support him. The Coates travel agencies, the architects and auditors. He's got representatives of the tourist industry. The town's commercial interests are represented, such as guest house communities and advertising agencies. Including ourselves and a number of individuals, that is the Coates Association and the Coates Society, are all members of this community, and we do support them. There are now 105 members at the last count of this new organisation, and the new applicants coming in fast. They aim to put the castle organisation onto a firm and realistic financial basis and otherwise. In the short term, James Barman has done more constructive organisation of the castle than has been done over all the years since the wall came down. He is to be congratulated. Naturally, he has our support. We have made it clear that the association support the castle community as far as we can. We're not interested, as I say, in the political side, but we do really very much support him in everything he does for the records and the museums. And you've heard that the guard room has been completely gutted, and the Newcastle Museum has now been formed, and the artefacts displayed have been improved in order to create a better showing for visitors. The Keller House complete is basically now designated to form a focal point of a wider and more ambitious museum, so they can show all sides of the escape activities. And also, it is envisaged to have lifelike scenarios of rooms and prisoners, where prisoners will be created, as it were, to represent both the orthodox living in those days and the illegal activities. And there will be up-to-date video and audio displays of interest for the enjoyment of all the visitors. There's a new office in the castle, it's open 7 days a week. We welcome very much, and I speak here on behalf of the association, we welcome very much a strong support which has been given by the Society and the help which has been contributed one way or another. This has been generously recognised by the castle community itself. All of you will know that Dr. Anderson, who's a member, who's one of your members, and the son Bill Anderson, has worked very hard to compile the comprehensive display of the pictures in the castle. He has also persuaded the Cambridge University to sponsor and set up the internet contribution, which is now going concern. I've seen it. It's a work of great worth, and he is really very much to be congratulated on the enormous amount of work he must have spent in compiling that. And he's very much appreciated by the Coates community. Marmon has recruited a much stronger workforce, employing this selections of the ABM employees, which is equivalent to our youth training and employment scheme. And they're going to do general work and also help with the guided tours. The number of visitors a year reached about 12,000, but this could be multiplied many times if the presentation is modernised and improved. And that's what they're going for. Coates Castle has at last realised its potential assets, which bring a significant advantage to the town. And also, for the first time, there is a vigorous and worthy effort which has been instigated. Lastly, you may know that well, you obviously do know about the world travel market. My information is that this, by the way, takes place on the 11th to 14th of the month, and as I understand it, in speaking to James Martin last week on the telephone, he said that any of you, or from the Society or the Association, will be very welcome, and those interested in visiting the stand, because Colditz will be displayed as a special feature there on the German stand, can be put in touch direct with James Martin for entrance tickets and information. And this is what he told me. So I shall have the means of being able to contact him when he arrives in London, and your own secretary will have the same means as well. So I suggest that it is a question of any of you really want to go there. I encourage you to do so, because I think it's really well worthwhile, and it will show that we as British, on the whole, are making a good contribution for their support. I know they'll be delighted to see you. And thank you very much once again for inviting us. I'm sorry to be so long.
Be so bold. I'd like to add a little rider to what Hugh Bruce has said to us, and that is that those of us who were at the meeting in November here last year, and we met Jens Malman, and the newer members will have to take our word for it, that he's really a fantastically enthusiastic chap, and he deserves absolutely all of our support in every way, shape or form possible. We couldn't have a better chap, I think, to be doing his job as Hugh has described.
Yeah.
Make one very final point. Regarding Hugh, your offer there about having a get-together, as it were, this is one of our smaller rooms at Phillips. I mean, over the other side in the main building, we've got some quite large rooms, and I feel that I'd be quite happy to organise a meeting here, as it's in the centre of London. This possibly is about the best place for it. And as far as food is concerned, we can get some professional people. This is done by our cook. Sometime we can organise something. I'll be quite happy for it to be here, you know, as long as we get the numbers interested from the society. And we'll talk about it.
I suggest that May would probably be a better month, because a lot of our members have grandchildren and they get involved with them in the summer, summer holidays and so on and so forth.
Well, we're going in the beginning of April, so that will give us a month to organise things.
Any time May, or alternatively you've got to take it to the back end of the year, say September, when the evenings are drawing in.
Earlier the better.
They don't.
May is probably the best one. In May.
Right, well, if that's everything, I think we can probably conclude the formal part of the afternoon. Please stay on and mingle and chat. You've got to get now.
And we don't want any food left. I don't have to dump that lot.
Could we say that whatever happens, we're closing up shop at 5?
You have to know, in fact, someone is still alive. Oh, is he?
Not very much.
No, he wasn't one of the older members. Oh, I know.
We have a list, I said.